Welcome back to Virtual Trade. I'm joined once again by new trader Jenny Horne. Jenny, welcome back to the show.
It's great to be back, Scott.
Great. We're going to have a lot of fun today, Jenny. We're going to be going into the thinkorswim platform and doing a search for stocks in specific sectors.
Great. I think I have a lot to learn when it comes to searching in sectors, so I'm ready to get started.
Sure. Now, well, before we jump in, Jenny, let's just do a little bit of review. You know, we've talked about in your portfolio when we first built it, the importance of diversifying that portfolio.
Right.
And remember, we looked at different sectors. We talked a little bit about allocation. So if we do add things outside of just stocks, we might look at other asset classes like commodities and bonds and things like that.
Right.
All right, so far so good. Now, we also talked that within the specific sectors of stocks, there's the subgroups, the industry subgroups. And we saw how we could list those and see those on the Market Watch tab or, of course, on your watch list.
Yes, and people talk about how sectors are moving all the time, and so it's important, I think, to know how to search within those kinds of things.
Exactly. So today what we're going to do is take it to the next level, Jenny. We're going to say, all right, so if we've gone from the overall portfolio to the sectors to the subgroups, now when we get into those subgroups, we still found that those lists were fairly extensive sometimes, right?
Yes.
So the question now becomes, how do we further search amongst the stocks in those subgroups of the sectors? And that's what we're going to focus on today. And the fun part, Jenny, is going to be that we're going to pick the parameters that we're going to use to search or filter for these stocks.
Sounds fun.
So far, so good?
Yep.
Okay, well, let's kick it off. We're going to jump right into thinkorswim software. And as you can see, we're on the monitor tab. So Jenny, I'm going to let you go ahead and drive the platform here. And let's go over to the scan tab and just click on that. Now, once we're in the scan tab, you can see just below, let me grab the mouse for a second, it says Stock Hacker, Options, Spread Hacker, Spread Book. We're going to focus on Stock Hacker, of course, because we're going to be using parameters to filter for just stocks for right now. All right, so we have that. Now, down below, the first question becomes, where do you want to scan? And by default, it says all stocks. All right, well, that's not quite what we want to do. We want to be a little more specific about that. So why don't you go ahead and click on the word where it says all stocks, and let's go down to the sectors and by industry. You can see, go one more. There you go.
Right,
so
there
now,
they are.
exactly. So you know exactly where to find the sectors. So we're in the sectors, so let's go ahead and pick one, maybe industrials. We'll start with that, the third one down. And then if you go to the right, then you can see the subgroups within that sector of materials. But for our first search, Jenny, let's just do this. Move up to the top of that and just select all industrials.
Now we're just doing industrials just as an example, right?
Exactly. We're just
Okay.
picking that one sector as an example for this exercise. All right. Now the next thing is we've established our sector. Now we want to go ahead and say, well, what stocks do we want to review or scan through that are part of this sector?
Right.
So you can see the box right next to it says intersect with. So let's reduce our field a little bit. Maybe what we'll do is we'll go down and pick the S&P 500.
Okay.
A very broad-based indice, but still has plus or minus 500 stocks in that indice. So that's still a large group to scan through. All right, well, fine. Go down a little bit lower. Now you can see that there's different filters that we're going to use to screen or filter out for these stocks. And what we'll start off with is you can see by default you have three already set up for you by default. It's simple to add a filter simply by clicking on, let's say we want to add a stock filter, we could click here to add one. If we want to get rid of one of the filters, just follow me over here to the right, Jenny. At this point, I'm going to hide the left side bar just to give us a little more room. Okay, there we go. And you can see to get rid of any one of the filters, just click on the X, and as you can see, it disappears.
Great, that it was easy.
All right, so let's dig in and start looking at some of the things that we want to start off with. Now, the first thing that people often want to look at when they start filtering a stock is what is the current price of that stock?
Right. So this is net change, but we're looking at my portfolio, which you've always said is longer term. So I don't think it really matters as much what the stock is doing on the day.
So it says net change just by default, but you're right. If a stock is just up or down a little bit on this particular day, that's not necessarily going to play into our long-term portfolio. We're more concerned maybe what is the price of that stock. So, and again, that can vary widely. So let's narrow down the range of the price of the stocks we're going to look at. So Jenny, let's go ahead and change that to Mark. On the drop down there, and Mark, of course, is the last trading price or the current trading price of the stock. Now, when we go to the right, it's going to ask us what's your minimum and maximum price of the stock you want to use. Well, in this case, let's tell you what, let's just make it easy. We'll pick $25 as the minimum price.
Okay.
And we'll pick $250 as the maximum price.
Oh, wait, there we go.
and 250. All right, now what this is going to let us do is it's going to obviously eliminate the stocks that are much lower in price and of course the stocks that are much higher in price. I mean, there are stocks, let's say take something like Amazon trading for over $1,000 or $1,500 a share. Obviously we can't buy many shares when a stock that's highly priced. Does that make sense?
It does, and I liked the way this moved for us when we adjusted the parameters, because if I really had no idea what the price range I wanted, I could just kind of shrink it.
Right, and remember these numbers on the far right, which is giving us matches, were over 500. Now they're down to 62. So you can see we're starting to filter down and narrow the field. All right, second one is volume. Now on volume, same thing. This is important as well because we want to trade a stock that is fairly liquid. We've talked about that before. And that has to do with the average daily volume. So we want to set a minimum there.
So explain a little bit what that means when you say a stock is liquid. I remember we talked about volume, but liquid is a big term.
Liquidity basically means that there's a lot of volume, and that means there's a lot of market participants. And the good thing about that is when there's a lot of participants, you'll have the people bidding to buy and the people selling, and they come very close on their markets because there's so many people in the marketplace.
So basically, simply put, there's just a lot of people bidding on that stock or selling.
Or selling, and that's our advantage because we will be buying and selling potentially as well. And we'd rather be trading in a market that's very narrow than one that's very wide, because we have to give up to buy and sell in a very wide market. We like what's called a more liquid or tight market.
Okay.
All right, so let's pick a minimum on this. The maximum is probably okay. How about 500,000 shares a day? Now I know that sounds like a lot.
It sounds like a ton.
It is, but there are many stocks, Jenny, that trade in the tens or hundreds of millions a day. So our minimum will be 500,000. Of course, now our matches are down to about 44. All right, so we have a couple filters based on the stocks themselves. Let's add a filter that's a little bit different, and this is going to be a fundamental filter.
Okay.
So now we're going to start talking, Jenny, about the fundamentals of the stock. And remember, we talked a little bit about those, the revenues, the earnings, the dividends, the things that fundamentally are behind a stock.
Yes, I remember those.
Okay, so we're going to do a fundamental search here in this one. And what we're going to do then is one of the important things that we talked about is how do we rate how a company's doing? Well, typically that's earnings per share.
Okay, I remember we talked about this.
All right, well, let's go ahead and hit the drop-down box, and we're going to go down to earnings per share.
Okay.
And you can see this one is earnings per share TTM.
Okay, now why would we pick earnings per share TTM over just the simple earnings per share?
Good question. Now TTM stands for trailing 12 months. So what we're going to be doing in this case is looking at earnings they've had over the last year.
Okay.
Right? Sometimes you can see earnings based on forward earnings. Well, of course, we haven't had those yet, so those are just estimations or opinions of analysts and people like that. All right, so let's do that. Now, also, let's pick, also within this drop-down box where it says current and annual, let's go down to where it says value, and let's make this a year-over-year percentage change. So we want to compare how things are changing year-over-year on a percentage basis.
And that's perfect.
All right, so now let's pick a minimum of maybe 10%. And then maybe a maximum of, well, I don't know, 50 or 60%, something like that. All right, and we'll just put some numbers in there. All right, now Jenny, I think we're pretty close to where we want to be, so let's go ahead and click on the scan button and see what comes up with this search.
Okay, so it did narrow it down to 31 matches.
All right, yes, so we've narrowed that field down quite a bit. Remember, we started with over 500 stocks here. Now we're down to just a handful or a short list.
Yes.
And Jenny, if we tightened up some of these parameters, that would reduce this number even more.
Right, okay, and this is much more reasonable than what it started with, I think.
Well, as a matter of fact, as long as we're looking at this, I'm trying to see, are there any stocks that look familiar to us within this group? And I see DE, Deere, that's actually one of the stocks in our portfolio.
Yes, they're one of the originals, I think.
And we have that stock from this sector.
That's great.
All right, Jenny, well, that pretty much wraps up our starting point for this. And remember, if you want to search for other things that are fundamentals, sometimes people look for PE ratios and things like that. So this is just a beginning list of things that you might want to look at.
Yeah, and I think this is really cool that you can actually search by things like earnings per share, EPS. I've heard of a lot, and I never really knew you could use it this way.
Exactly. Dividend yields is another one that's very popular as well.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Well, listen, Jenny, what did you think about this session?
I thought this was great, and I think this is something I could mess around with a lot more just because it's kind of endless.
You're absolutely right. This is a great tool and really helps people narrow down to individual stocks that meet their criteria.
Exactly.
All right, well, Jenny, we're going to wrap things up. Thanks again for joining, and that was a fun session.
Thanks, Scott.